The cold grip of morning fog clung to the riverbank as Emma Lawson's screams shattered the dawn silence. What began as her peaceful morning jog through Texas town ended with the discovery that would haunt her dreams forever. Sprawled upon the muddy embankment, partially submerged in the gentle current, lay the body of Kianna Harris, her chestnut hair splayed out like a dark halo around her still face. Blood mingled with river water. A life extinguished too soon. Kianna wasn't just another statistic. She was the vibrant fourth-grade teacher who stayed late helping struggling students. The woman whose powerful voice lifted spirits every Sunday from the second row of the New Hope Baptist Church choir. The daughter who called her mother every night, without fail. The secret wife whose wedding ring now hung on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath the surface of her public life. But someone had decided she deserved to die. Thank you for joining us for another episode of True Crime Atlas. If you value keeping your loved ones safe and informed about the dangers that lurk in our society, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories and potentially saves lives by raising awareness. Now, let's continue with Kianna's story. Detective Jordan Blake had seen his share of bodies in 15 years with the town police department. But something about this one sent an unusual chill down his spine. Perhaps it was the peaceful expression on her face, jarringly at odds with the violence evident in the deep bruising around her neck. Or maybe it was the pendant clutched so tightly in her right hand that the medical examiner would later have to pry her fingers open to retrieve it, a small silver cross with a distinctive chip in one arm. "Time of death?" Blake asked, crouching beside Dr. Ramirez, the county medical examiner. "Based on body temperature and rigor, between 10 p.m. and midnight last night," Ramirez replied, gently closing Kianna's eyelids. "'Cause appears to be strangulation, though I'll confirm after the autopsy." As crime scene technicians photographed and collected evidence, whispers spread through town like wildfire. By noon, a small crowd had gathered at the yellow police tape, many openly weeping. Kianna Harris wasn't just liked in the community, she was beloved. "Who would do this to her?" sobbed Marjorie Winters, principal at Town Elementary where Kianna taught. "She didn't have an enemy in the world." Detective Blake wasn't so sure. In his experience, the brightest smiles often concealed the deepest secrets. 6 months earlier, Kianna had stood nervously in the small office behind Henderson's Jewelry, clutching Darrell Scott's hand so tightly he winced. "You sure about this?" Darrell whispered, his eyes searching hers. At 28, he was 2 years her junior, and his face still held traces of boyish uncertainty, despite the neatly trimmed beard he'd grown to look older. "More sure than I've ever been about anything," Kianna replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Judge Martinez smiled at the young couple. "No witnesses?" "No," they answered in unison. "It wasn't ideal, but it was necessary." Darrell squeezed Kianna's hand. "Just until I get my big break. Once my music takes off, we'll have a proper ceremony. The whole town can come." Kianna nodded, but they both knew the secrecy wasn't just about waiting for Darrell's music career to flourish. It was about Pastor Clarence Monroe, the towering figure who'd helmed New Hope Baptist for 30 years, and who had made his views on appropriate matches abundantly clear. Pastor Monroe had taken a special interest in Kianna since she joined the church as a teenager. He'd mentored her, secured her scholarship to college, and recommended her for her teaching position. His influence over her life was considerable, and he wouldn't approve of Daryl, a struggling musician who rarely attended services and came from the wrong side of town. So they wed in secret, Kianna continuing to live in her small apartment, while Daryl crashed on couches and worked odd jobs between gigs. Their stolen moments of happiness were precious and few. Detective Blake stood in Kianna's apartment, taking in the neat bookshelves filled with teaching materials and classic literature, the piano in the corner with sheet music still open, the refrigerator adorned with children's artwork. Nothing appeared disturbed, no signs of forced entry. She had dinner with someone, noted Officer Chen, pointing to 2 wine glasses in the sink, one with a lipstick stain. Someone she knew. Blake nodded, opening her calendar. The night of her death showed only a cryptic entry. Meeting, 8 p.m., riverfront. No name. Her phone revealed little more. Text to colleagues about school matters. Daily check-ins with her mother. And messages to someone saved simply as D. Presumably romantic in nature, but careful, as if they feared discovery. As Blake departed, an elderly neighbor approached him hesitantly. "I saw her leave around 7:30, Mrs. Gonzalez offered. She looked nice, dressed up a bit, and she was carrying something. A folder, I think. Did she seem worried? Frightened?" "No." Mrs. Gonzalez paused, thinking. Determined. She looked determined. 3 months before her death, Kianna had been assigned to oversee Town Elementary's participation in a new environmental education initiative. The program was spearheaded by Lucas Miller, an enthusiastic environmentalist who had recently moved to town to establish a conservation center along the river. Their first meeting at the school had been strictly professional, but as the weeks passed, Kianna found herself impressed by Lucas's passion and innovative ideas for connecting children with nature. "We could create outdoor classrooms," Lucas suggested during one planning session, blue eyes alight with excitement. "Get the kids monitoring water quality, identifying native species, real hands-on learning." Kianna matched his enthusiasm. "They would love that. Most of these kids have never really connected with the river, despite living right next to it." Their shared vision led to longer meetings, often stretching into evening hours at the local coffee shop. They made an unusual pair. Lucas with his flannel shirts and hiking boots, Kianna always professionally dressed even after school hours. But their easy rapport and complementary strengths made the project flourish. What neither foresaw was how their collaboration would be perceived by others in the small community, particularly those at New Hope Baptist, where Lucas's absence was noted, and his environmental activism sometimes conflicted with certain members' business interests. "I saw her with that white environmentalist again," Margaret Foster had whispered to Pastor Monroe after choir practice one evening. 3rd time this week. The pastor's face had remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his Bible. "Thank you for your concern, Sister Margaret. I'll speak with Kianna." The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death. Forensics found defensive wounds on Kianna's hands and traces of skin under her fingernails. She had fought her attacker. The pendant clutched in her hand had indeed been a silver cross with a chip in one arm, identical to those given to long-standing members of New Hope Baptist Choir. Detective Blake now sat across from Daryl Scott in the interview room. Grief had hollowed the young man's face, his eyes bloodshot from crying or lack of sleep, possibly both. "When did you last see Kianna?" Blake asked. 2 days before. Daryl swallowed hard. "Before she died. We met at Willow Point. It's this spot by the river where we could be alone. And your relationship with her was? Darrell looked up, defiance temporarily masking his grief. She was my wife. We got married 6 months ago. Blake managed to hide his surprise. A secret marriage? Because of Pastor Monroe, Darrell explained, showing Blake photos on his phone of their small ceremony. He's controlled her life since she was a kid, had all these plans for her, including who she should be with. And it wasn't me. Where were you the night she died? Playing a gig at the back door in Marshall. 40 minutes away. There were at least 50 people there, plus the bar staff. I didn't even know she was. His voice broke. I didn't know until the next morning when I tried calling her. Blake nodded, making notes. Did Kianna mention anyone bothering her? Any concerns? Darrell hesitated. She was worried about the reaction to her work with Lucas Miller. Said Pastor Monroe had been asking a lot of questions, stopping by her classroom unannounced. She thought he suspected about us, too. And this Lucas Miller? Could there have been something between them? No, Darrell said firmly. They were just colleagues. She was committed to me. After a pause, he added, but the pastor. He's always had this thing for her. Calling it guidance or mentorship, but the way he looked at her, he shuddered. It wasn't godly, detective. Lucas Miller's conservation center consisted of a renovated boathouse filled with water testing equipment, educational displays, and stacks of pamphlets. When Blake arrived, Lucas was leading a group of 8th graders through a demonstration on watershed protection. After dismissing the students, Lucas invited Blake into his cluttered office. At 35, he had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, sun-creased eyes, tanned skin, and calloused hands. Kianna was brilliant, Lucas said when Blake expressed condolences. She understood that environmental education isn't just about facts, it's about connection. Her students adored her. You spent a lot of time with her recently. Lucas nodded. For the education program, yes, we had big plans. Just professional? Blake watched him carefully. Entirely. Lucas replied without hesitation. Plus, she mentioned a husband, though I never met him. Seemed to be a complicated situation. Did she ever mention problems with anyone? Conflicts? Lucas paused, choosing his words carefully. There was tension with Pastor Monroe. Our last meeting, she was upset. Said he'd cornered her after choir practice, questioned her about her inappropriate associations, meaning me, I guess. He'd apparently followed her to one of our meetings. Any idea why he'd do that? Besides the obvious racist undertones of a black woman working closely with a white man in a town like this? Lucas's tone was bitter. Yes. My conservation work threatens several development projects his church members have financial stakes in. But there was more. He hesitated. Go on, Blake encouraged. She said something that struck me as odd. That he'd told her he'd sacrificed too much for her to see her stray from the path. That he was the only one who truly understood what was best for her. It sounded possessive. The congregation of New Hope Baptist gathered for a candlelight vigil the evening after Kianna's body was discovered. Hundreds stood solemnly in the church parking lot, the glow of their candles illuminating tear-streaked faces. Pastor Clarence Monroe led the service, his imposing figure draped in black, his deep voice carrying powerfully across the crowd without need of amplification. Kianna Harris was a light in this community, he intoned. A vessel of God's love. We cannot understand why such evil has befallen our sister, but we trust in the Lord's greater plan," Blake observed from the periphery, noting how the pastor's voice caught when speaking Kianna's name. Was it genuine grief, or something else? The detective also noticed the silver cross around Monroe's neck, identical to the one found in Kianna's hand, except without the telltale chip. After the vigil, Blake approached Tanya Williams, who had directed the choir alongside Kianna. "Everyone in the choir gets one," Tanya confirmed, touching her own cross necklace. "Pastor Monroe presents them after a year of service. Have you noticed anything unusual between the pastor and Kianna?" Tanya glanced around nervously before responding. "He treated her differently. Special privileges, extra attention. Some of us thought maybe she was like a daughter to him. But lately," she trailed off. "Lately?" Blake prompted. "He's been different. Watching her during rehearsals, showing up wherever she was. Last month, she tried to resign from the choir, said she needed more time for other commitments. He wouldn't accept it. Said her voice was a gift she had no right to withhold from God." Shortly after Kianna's 25th birthday, Pastor Monroe had invited her to his office after Sunday service. "I have something important to discuss," he'd said, closing the door behind them. At 53, Clarence Monroe remained an impressive figure, 6'3" with broad shoulders, and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to respect. "Of course, Pastor," Kianna replied, taking a seat across from his desk. Instead of sitting behind the desk, he'd chosen the chair adjacent to hers, turning it to face her directly. Their knees nearly touched. "I've watched you grow from a shy girl into an accomplished young woman," he began. "Your faith, your talent, your dedication to the children you teach, you exemplify everything this church stands for." "Thank you," Kianna said, slightly uncomfortable with his intense gaze. "I wouldn't be where I am without your guidance, which is precisely my point." He leaned forward. "Spiritual and otherwise." She nodded, unsure where this was leading. "I believe the time has come for us to formalize our connection," he continued. "To join our paths permanently in service to the Lord." Kianna's confusion must have shown on her face. "I'm asking you to become my wife, Kianna." The shock had rendered her momentarily speechless. Pastor Monroe had been divorced for nearly a decade. His ex-wife had left town years ago, and he had rarely mentioned her since. He'd shown no romantic interest in anyone in the congregation, least of all Kianna, who had always viewed him as a mentor, almost a father figure. "Pastor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he urged, taking her hands in his. "It makes perfect sense. We share the same values, the same commitment to this community, and I can provide for you far better than any young man your age." She had extracted her hands gently. "I'm honored, but I don't have those feelings for you." His expression hardened slightly. "Feelings develop, Kianna. What matters is a solid foundation of shared purpose." "I need time to think," she'd said finally, standing up. "Of course." His smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Pray on it. God will guide you to the right decision." She'd fled the office, her mind reeling. The offer, and his certainty that she would accept, had disturbed her deeply. It was the beginning of the distance she'd started placing between herself and the church, between herself and Pastor Monroe. And it was what had driven her into Daryl's arms, eventually leading to their secret marriage. The break in the case came 3 days after Kianna's body was discovered. A teenage fisherman turned in a water-damaged folder he'd found snagged on branches downstream from the murder site. Inside were partially legible financial documents from New Hope Baptist Church, showing substantial sums diverted from the building fund to an offshore account. The records were in Kianna's handwriting, with sticky notes marking discrepancies and questions. The final page bore a single sentence: "Meeting with CM to discuss irregularities. 8 p.m. Tuesday." Detective Blake obtained a warrant to search Pastor Monroe's home and office. In his garage, they found a recently cleaned car with traces of blood on the trunk carpet that matched Kianna's type. In his desk drawer, a silver cross with a chipped arm, the match to the one clutched in Kianna's hand. When confronted, Pastor Monroe remained composed. "I gave her that cross years ago when she joined the choir. If she had it with her, it only proves our close relationship." "And the financial records? The blood in your car?" "I drove her home occasionally." As for the records, I mentor several young people in church administration. She may have been reviewing them. But when Blake revealed that they'd found Kianna's phone hidden in Monroe's house, with text messages proving she had discovered his embezzlement, the pastor's facade cracked. "She threatened everything," he whispered, sinking into a chair. "Not just the money, my reputation, my church, after all I'd done for her." "So you killed her?" Monroe looked up, his eyes hollow. "I just wanted to talk, to make her understand what was at stake. She was being unreasonable, threatening to expose me if I didn't confess to the congregation. And then, she said she was married. To that musician, that she'd never had feelings for me, would never have accepted my proposal even without him. After everything I invested in her, she chose him." His fists clenched. "She tried to leave. I grabbed her arm. She fought back. Before I knew what was happening." He stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I didn't mean to, but she wouldn't listen." Pastor Clarence Monroe pled guilty to second-degree murder and financial fraud. The court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. At his sentencing, he addressed the packed courtroom. "I loved Kianna. In my twisted way, I believed she belonged to me because of all I'd invested in her future. When she rejected that claim, when she chose her own path, I couldn't accept it. My pride and entitlement cost a precious life. No punishment can ever atone for that." Darrell Scott established the Kianna Harris Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing education careers. Lucas Miller renamed his environmental program in her honor, ensuring her teaching philosophy lived on. And each year on the anniversary of her death, her former students release paper lanterns at the riverbank. Detective Blake still visits her grave occasionally, bringing yellow daisies, her favorite, according to her mother. The case taught him what he shares with new officers, that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who claim to love us most, those who believe their contributions to our lives entitle them to ownership of our choices, our dreams, and our very existence. For Kianna Harris, freedom came at the ultimate price. Sometimes the folks we trust the most can hurt us the worst. Pastor Monroe seemed like a good man, a leader who helped Kianna grow up. But his kindness came with strings attached. When she chose her own path, loving who she wanted and standing up for what was right, he couldn't handle losing control. This kind of harm happens more than we think. People who do nice things for us don't own us. Real love means letting people make their own choices, even when those choices don't include us. Kianna's story reminds us to watch for warning signs. When someone tries to control who we see, gets angry when we succeed without them, or acts like we owe them for their help, these aren't signs of love, they're signs of danger. If you ever feel trapped by someone's kindness, remember you have the right to your own life. Talk to someone you trust. There's always help available. Kianna died, standing up for truth and freedom. The best way to honor her memory is by living our own truth, while keeping ourselves safe from those who think their love gives them the right to harm us.